Hello, everyone. It's Double Shine here, and hope you've all been enjoying Gridmaster. Today, I want to talk a little bit about the Gridmaster competition. If you didn't know, the first three people to complete the grid have basically been invited by Jagex to work on designing a relic for the next leagues, which should hopefully be coming out next year. Hoping for early next year. And it's been really cool to see this kind of return to competition ever since the point system moved away from Dragon Trophy being based on a percentage system and just being a flat threshold, which I think is honestly a fantastic change for just about everybody. But I know that for a lot of the people who were very competitive with these seasonal modes, I know for a lot of them, going for a competition like this is a lot of fun. I also had a lot of fun trying to place as best I could, and yeah, overall, it was a really fun event. And I know there's been a lot of concerns about Gridmaster sort of being done a little bit faster than people expected, and just not really having much end game left. Like, you've all got all this really big power, but you have nothing to spend it on. It's been really cool to see a lot of new ideas coming out, such as Skritic's been working on the Gridmaster Games. This is a randomized challenge where you get to go and pick random tiles, and there's also a bunch of bonus tasks as well. I've been going through this as well. I'm almost done, and I've just been having like a ton of fun. I'm really, really glad to see the randomized feature coming back. It's something I really had hoped for Gridmaster, like when it was first announced. So I would definitely give this a try if you're interested in like a bit of a different format. It's definitely leaning more on the challenge side, and the slower pace feels a lot more like leagues. However, there's also been this new emergence of speed running grid completion. I think a lot of this kind of bore out from people who've, first completed the board thinking like, man, if I knew everything I know now, I could be so much more efficient and I could get it done a lot faster the second time, third time through. And I've seen a lot of conversation around the competition being not who's the first person to complete, but who can complete it in the fastest time instead. Basically, whose play time is the fastest when they actually complete the board. Before I actually started playing RuneScape, I used to speedrun a lot of games. In fact, I actually started my first streams speedrunning Hollow Knight from the back of my university's computer science lab. And I've also been a huge fan of the Race to World First in World of Warcraft. So it's really cool to actually see a lot of the same kind of discussions about speedruns and creating fair races in the context of like the leagues, the seasonal modes, all that stuff. And it's fun to see the old school RuneScape community kind of have to solve a lot of the challenges that I think are prominent throughout those communities as well. In particular, I know that the Race to World First in World of Warcraft is always hotly debated because Europeans start 16 hours after the North American servers go live. And so there's this constant argument every single raid tier about like, is that fair? Should European guilds be given like a 16-hour buffer window where they technically will be counted as a world first, even though they might finish after the North Americans? I definitely understand the sentiment of people who would rather make it based on playtime, as then, could space it out with multiple play sessions. And there's actually a little bit more longevity to the race. It's not just over in one day. However, there's a lot of problems with making the race based on how much time you actually spent logged in. And I think keeping the competition around like the first player to the finish line, I think it just makes it more exciting. One of the biggest things is that there are a number of tasks that do require a level of RNG. I'm sure a lot of people who have tried to obtain the rare drop from Vorkath know what I'm talking about here. You could get super lucky and get this in like 1 drop or 2 drops, or you could get the head at the pity rate of 50 kills. And I can absolutely guarantee you that when it comes to like who is going to complete the fastest grid, a lot of that is going to be just who's getting those very lucky drops at Vorkath, who's getting them at Yama. I know some people have gone like 50 kills without anything at Yama. Huey, Araxor, these are also rare drops, but I feel like Yama and Vorkath are definitely the 2 big ones. In addition, there's also a couple like, let's say, less than fun strategies that are used in order to get the fastest completion time. I know that as of now, the absolute fastest like world record time involves logging out in the middle of a raid and then having a team carry you through it so that you can get like the Tombs of Masket, Chambers of Zarek tile done. And I mean, even outside from the logout thing, which is pretty silly in itself, the idea of like speed runs where you're like getting carried by a team that's sitting there, like, I don't know, that just seems a little crazy to me. I have a really hard time like taking a Dark Souls speed run seriously, where they're like summoning other players online to carry them through the bosses. Like, yeah, maybe that is actually faster, but I mean, come on, like, what are we doing there, right? Most importantly, though, I feel that when you have a race that's a first person to complete it, it sort of gets this like sweet spot of the hype where people have a lot of eyes watching it and it's still a lot of fun. It's something that I really wish would be implemented when it comes to the leagues like competition. Unfortunately, the high scores are all about who gets the most amount of points, and you can see here that all these people have the same amount of points because they chose the exact same three regions, right? And the entire like race is basically who completes every single task for those three regions. And I think that that usually takes like 3 weeks or so. And I think it would be a lot more fun and a lot more interesting and have more eyes on it if this was instead like a race to dragon, or maybe it was a race to like 40,000 points, something that is a little bit smaller, a little bit more digestible, and doesn't have a exact three regions that you have to pick. Otherwise, like this person right here who has 84, 170, they might have completed every single task in their regions, and they just literally cannot get this amount of points. And I think also just opens it up to more people who don't want to spend, 3 weeks straight of just grinding out, getting every single task done. However, that's not what I'm here to talk about. In fact, that's not my main problem with all of this. In fact, a lot of speedruns have some kind of RNG component, whether that's farming a drop or getting lucky on certain sections. Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time has a very infamous section with Dampe the Gravedigger that's very RNG based as to like where he digs and if you're getting the right drop. And that's probably killed more runs than almost anything else in that entire like speed run. And it's still one of the most popular speed runs out there. So clearly, RNG is not enough to kill a speed run by itself. My big problem is that I can't do any speed runs on my account, or at least I can't do any without paying more money per attempt. I can't play on my main double shine, which yes, I have membership, but I've already completed the grid. I can't go and try again for a faster completion. This is my big issue with creating any kind of competition around this, is the fact that there is a ticket for entry. Every single attempt at speedrunning this requires you to bond up or give membership to a new account to try again. And I just don't think that that's acceptable. And I don't think that that's going to fly with like the vast majority of people. To put it into perspective, an old school bond for me costs $9 right now. $9 to give myself 14 days of membership, which I'm only going to be using for like 10 hours for a speed run. I think we can all agree that that is absolutely ridiculous that I would have to pay $9 per entry to the speed run, one that has a lot of RNG in it, one that you're probably going to reset if you don't get lucky on some of those drops. And I just don't see how this is possible for a lot of people to engage in, when every single attempt requires you to start a new character, bond it up, give it membership, and then if things go badly or if you just get unlucky, yeah, good luck, start all over again, and you got to pay that price all over again, and all that membership you got is completely wasted. I mean, I think if you put it in context of any other speedrun, it would be completely ridiculous. Final Fantasy IX, which is also about 8.5 hour speedrun, similar to the current Gridmaster completions. It also has a ton of RNG that can completely kill your runs very late into the speed run. Like, would it be at all reasonable if you had to buy the game again from Steam every single time to start again? Absolutely not, right? Like, nobody would do that. I also want to be clear that it's not the money that's the issue. Like, I'm not saying that like $9 is too much to pay for. I know there's also a couple other options. Like, I think somebody told me that on mobile, you can get 1 day of membership for $1. But even if it was $1 per attempt, I think the principle there is just absolutely ridiculous. And I don't think that that should be the model going forward if they want to actually promote these kind of events. And again, I think it's really, really awesome that they are encouraging this and they are kind of shouting it out. I think it's really, really cool. However, I think this has to be talked about first, because any kind of model that involves you having to pay to try again, I mean, it feels like you're paying quarters at an arcade machine for like an extra life. I think this is just going to alienate a large amount of the player base and basically restrict any long-term growth for these kinds of community events if there's no option available for players to try again or replay it without having to spend more cash. And just to kind of test this out, if you are somebody who would be interested in running a second playthrough of Gridmaster, trying out a different kind of challenge mode or trying a speedrun out, but you can't because you don't want to spend more money, and honestly, I don't blame you, leave a comment below saying something like that. I want to know your responses, and I want to know if this is something that a lot of people would love to do, and they just feel like they can't because, well, they don't want to pay more money to play the game again, And I want to be clear that it's not just for speedruns. I think for any kind of second challenge modes or randomizers or some kind of restricted playthrough. I know some people have done like Ultimate Iron Man Gridmasters, hardcore runs, things like that. There's so much different options that I just don't think a lot of players can really get interested in or get involved with because there's that flat fee that they have to pay just to try it out a second time. I remember playing hardcore classic WoW, and one of the things I loved was that every single time I died on a hardcore character, and trust me, I died a lot, I could just instantly go back to the character select screen, make a new character, and go right back into it. And that was a lot of fun for me. And if I had to pay like $5 every time to make a new character, I mean, I would just be done before even coming up with a name for my second character. I can't justify paying $5 every single time I die. That's just not okay. To me, this also extends into just leagues in general. I feel like when so many people feel like they only get one go at it, they only get one playthrough of the seasonal modes, a lot of people probably are going to pick the most meta builds, the most meta regions. Like they're just going to go as by the books as possible because I think a lot of people just don't want to experiment when they're only given one shot and there's no option of starting all over again without having to fork up another bond. Also, I know you can buy bonds with GP, but it's still, I mean, it's like 15 million. Like this isn't, it's not like this is a completely negligible amount of money. Like this is a pretty good amount of cash. And I always think back to leagues too, where I had even a lot of personal friends who didn't pick Last Recall because they didn't realize how insanely good it was. And instead of, starting a new character, I mean, they just quit. They were just done with it. They didn't want to pay another $9 to try again and pick the right tier 2 relic. I really feel that the number one priority we as a community can make and really talk about is the idea of having some option to allow that replayability. There's always been this talk of how replayable leagues is with different regions, different combat masteries, different relic choices. And while I'm an absolute sucker for making multiple accounts and stuff, I also feel like I can't really say it's replayable if you have to essentially rebuy the game every single time to give it a shot. And I know so many people just aren't able to engage with that aspect of the game because of the extra costs associated with it. Last leagues, I ran a fresh start with my community basically halfway through the league, and it really sucked to see how many people were super interested in that and really wanted to get involved, but they just didn't feel good about having to, bond up another character when they're already paying membership on their main. I think finding some way to allow multiple playthroughs of seasonal modes would just be the next big step forward, not just for leagues, but for all of these seasonal modes. I really believe that when it comes to these, one Jagex membership, one Jagex account will give you as many leagues characters as you want under that one subscription. And to be clear, this doesn't mean that you'll be able to multi-log in like 700 different characters all at once. You'll only be able to play one at a time. But if you want to start again, if you didn't like your choices, if you just want to try something new out, I believe that you should have that option. I really, really hope that that is the direction that they go with when it comes to these seasonal modes. Now, I'll be honest, I don't have a perfect answer to this or how this should be implemented or how this should be solved, let alone having the technical awareness of how this would actually be implemented. Like, I don't know what is just allowed and what is restricted by the game clients. I know one thing a lot of people talk about is some reset option. So you could essentially take your character and either talk to an NPC or press some button somewhere and boom, you start from scratch. You've completely reset all your progress. Now, I personally don't love that because, well, I like my old characters too. If I finished the grid or if I got to tier 8 in a league, it's like I want to still be able to play my old characters and just try something new out for fun on the side. So that's why I love the idea of being able to create multiple characters. That way you could, try something new out and then still go back. You don't have to choose one or the other to completely reset your progress. However, I know that for things like the speed runs, I'm sure it gets really annoying going and making, hundreds of characters here that you're trying out and that you'll probably forget about and never touch again in a week. So, there's no perfect solution here. That's what I'm trying to get at. Like, I don't know exactly what the process should be. It's pretty annoying making new characters, but I also don't want it to be the case that like you have to reset all your progress. So really my goal here is to just start the conversation, make sure that the community kind of keeps this in mind and hopefully Jagex gives us some response because I know it's something that a lot of us Leagues players have been asking for many, many, many years. And I just hope that it's something we get sooner than later because for me, this is really the final missing piece of leagues and all other seasonal modes that really needs to be solved someday. Overall, I think the idea of having one membership and you can log into one character at a time. That's just industry standard for MMOs, and I don't think that RuneScape is an exception to this. I completely understand that, old school doesn't have the same like class system as you would find in something like World of Warcraft. However, there are a lot of niche game modes, things like hardcore, things like Iron Man. I mean, how many people here would love to make a group Iron Man with some friends? But I mean, you don't want to bond up an account for a group that might die in 3 days, right? Like that's just, I feel like you should be able to do that and be able to play on them for a couple days without having to deal with that. However, I understand that that's a much bigger conversation. So really, my focus here is just more on seasonal modes and having the option of multiple characters. Anyways, let me know what you guys think. I feel very, very passionately about this topic, and I really, really hope it gets picked up and people start talking about it. I'm always trying to explore new ways to approach these seasonal modes, whether that's randomizers or certain restrictions. I would love to do like a hardcore league sometime. I think that would be a lot of fun. And even like speed runs, I think a lot of that would be so much fun. But I think until we start to see something like this that allows you to do that without having to pay a cost for it, I just don't really feel good supporting it because it's going to be such a small select of players that can actually just spend that amount of cash or that amount of GP to keep running it over and over. I'm not saying that Jag is like sitting there thinking like, oh, how can we extract 25 different bonds from all these people trying to like speed run the mode or anything like that. Like, I don't think that this is their intention, but I really would love to see this conversation open up, and I'd love to see their thoughts on creating some kind of way to allow these kinds of seasonal challenges to take place. That's it for me, guys. Have a wonderful day. Happy Gridmaster. I'll see you guys soon.